Hi, today we will look at the Functions and Processes module of the Dashjoin platform. Consider the following example. You have some customer feedback and you would like sentiment analysis, a machine learning external web service, in order to capture the sentiment, materialize that into the database, build a dashboard that allows you to immediately target negative sentiment and reach out to those customers immediately. So let's get started and build that. So we will create a small database, test database here. We'll just choose SQLite and connect to the database. We will upload some data that we prepared with, so you can see some message ID, you can see the actual message with different tones, and you can see some sample email. So we integrated that data and we have it right here. So now let's create another column. So let's call it the sentiments column with string data type. And we add that to the system. Now we would like our machine learning algorithm to write into that column. For the sentiment analysis, we can leverage this web service by Stanford, where you can give a simple text and the output is a JSON with positive, negative, and so on, the classification of the text. So let's go ahead and hook that up into the platform. Go to Functions and we choose the REST JSON function. So let's call it Deep AI, as in the name of the service that we're calling. The URL we're calling, we can copy from this curl command. The method is post, as you can see. We need a form encoded, so -f stands for URL form encoded. And we need to have one headers key, that's the API key. And over here, we paste in the API key. Okay, here we go. Now we can create the service. And now let's test it. We can actually test it using the Invoke widget. So actually, if we go to the service, there's a run function, but first of all, we need to provide some input. So the run function can only, you can only really test functions that do not have any input parameters. In this case, we need to pass the text that we need to test. So we actually go ahead and test it using the Invoke function. That's another function that can call a function where you can provide some input. So we can just actually leave it blank here, and we can just use this expression to test it. So let's go ahead and say call. So we need to provide the function name. So that was deep, and so now we need to have a JSON that sends the text. And let's say I love it. I get some positive. It's a positive result. So actually, we can then, since this JSON structure we cannot really write into the database, we need to navigate to the actual output. So we can say .output, and since that's an array, we can just dereference the array or pick the first array element. So that's actually the expression that we will need in our inference provider a little bit later. So let's take a mental note of that and put it on the clipboard. Okay, next up, I also want to send email. Okay, so let's choose the email service. And here I can provide properties for the SMTP server ID, encryption, etc. We'll leave that out for here, also username and password, obviously, and just create it like that. If there aren't any parameters specified, the service doesn't send an email, but just returns the email it would send, okay? So that should be good enough for this video here. I create this email service, and again, here I can now test it using, so email is up here, email service. I can now go back to Invoke again, and say, now I want to test my email service, and it explains and says, well, so you really should have a from argument. You really should have a to argument as well. And probably the text is also missing. Okay, so that's the email we will send later on. We'll place this email button on the instance page of the message record where we actually have the email in the field, so we can, so from is a constant, will be your corporation info@whatever.com. To will be dynamically taken from the database record, and the text will be something like, well, we're sorry to hear you didn't like our service, please contact us at XYZ. It's also a constant text in this case. Where, of course, you could also, if you had some more information about the person, say, dear Joe, dear Mike, dear Sarah, etc. Okay, so far so good. So we set up our email function, we set up our AI web service, and now let's put them together. So we can actually do this using the inference provider. The inference provider operates on a certain database. It also requires an input query. So let's first do the input query. The input query is quite simple. We will say all messages. It's essentially just a select star. So let's go into query editor. We select our test database, our messages table. And well, actually, that's exactly what I need. I need the primary key. So that's important for the inference because I need to have the row ID because I want to write into this row into the column sentiment. And I also need the input. That's the input we need for the deep learning web service. So that's exactly the query I need. And we can create this. Okay, so now we have the all messages. So let's go back to functions, and now we create a inference. Okay, so we will infer something. The database we operate on is the test database, and the query we run is the all messages. Okay, so now there's two options here which are important. So create schema allows you to create a table on the fly, so you can generate some new data and create columns and create tables. We won't do that here because we created our sentiment column already. And here's an old data. So that's basically the question, since we want to run this function repeatedly in order to keep updating it's a little bit like an ETL process into the database. And there's three options. So there's delete all, which would basically delete the entire table and simply replace it with a new result. That's definitely not what we want. Refresh would be an option where you can, that's actually important if you create new records somewhere and you can associate a certain record being created by a data source. That's also not what we want. We will just say ignore, and we'll say, well, simply merge it in. Since we have the primary key, we have our sentiment column, that's good enough for us, okay? So let's create this guy, and now let's head on over to the inference here, to the actual, so we have a run button here where we can, in this case, this function doesn't take any parameters, so we can, in a second, run it from here. But now we need to worry about the mapping, okay? So let's open this up. So now the mapping shows me up here a bunch of different tables. In this case, it's one table, and that's the result of the query that I just ran. And I basically just ran a select star from messages. Okay, so you say message.id and message.message. Okay, so now we need to map it into the right structure. First of all, we need to change the table name. Okay, so we can say down here, say rename table, and this should be the message table. Okay, so table is renamed to message up here. This column here needs to be, we need to rename this column to just ID. So remove, since the in the SQL editor we get the table prefix in case you do a join. So we have this here. So we have, so okay, so now this, so let's remember this. This is actually a JSON-NATA expression down here, which maps does a one-to-one column mapping from table result. Okay, so also this, I need to rename this column, and that needs to be sentiments. Okay, so the rename is done, and now we will paste this expression back in. So we will say, we'll call the deep AI function, and we will take the message.message column that we see right here, put it into the deep AI service, and the result will be traversed in the output field, the first element, and we'll stick that in. Okay, so let's compute that, and now we can see positive, negative, neutral, and so on. So that's exactly the table we would like to add. Okay, so we will simply OK and save this mapping for later, and now run the function. Okay, so there's the OK message that the function has been executed and the results have been merged, ignoring previous data that we have. Okay, so let's go back to the home page and check out the message table. And voila, here it is. This is the new sentiment column, which used to be empty. And now over here I can sort by, and I find this skeptical dude says, I hate it, having a negative review, right? So I can also have a dashboard with a list of and filter by negative, so I can just use this default here. So now the last step is to add an email functionality. So when we navigate on this, we can actually see the data here. We could also add some comments over here for our records. But now on here, we would like to include the email function. Okay, so let's do that. So we will edit the default layout of these messages, and I have switching to the custom layout. Okay, so we would like to have a button to send the email, and so run this when clicked. Okay, so this expression is the one we want. So first, let's you can always type in value to get the preview of the current data that we have, and value.from is the email address. Okay, so let's remember that on the clipboard, and we will say call our email function, and we need to have a from field. The from is constant, that's info@example.org. The to field is actually the dynamic part, which is different from depending on the record we're browsing. And finally, we need a text where we say that we are sorry to hear blah, blah, blah. Okay? All right. So down here, you see that this expression is successful. It returns the email that it would send. So it's a constant from sender to skeptical dude, which is the current page that I'm browsing. With the subject line is actually null, but stick this in as well. Say your feedback, and that would be the subject. Okay, so we have the subject, your feedback, and the text is sorry to hear. Okay, so let's save this, and well, let's make this a little bit prettier. Would be send email to customer. Switch the label. We have that. Okay, now let's save this. And now once we press send email over here, you can see that at this point, now I only have to configure the SMTP server, the IP address, and user credentials for sending the email. And then the email is sent whenever I press on here. So this is very nice. You can imagine that new input is flowing in here. And new sentiments or new texts appear, which would not have the sentiment. We can actually change the query to the all messages to filter on messages that do not yet have a sentiment, and just repeat the process. And we actually don't need to do any of the mapping. That's all fixed. The setup of the AI provider is fixed. I only need to rerun, in, let's say, once a day or once an hour, rerun my inference function, and it will fill in the blanks here, which allows me to make it just normal data in the database. I can use it in dashboards, etc., and I can sort by it and fish out the negative ones very easily. Again, I visit the record and I can immediately send an email and reach out. Now, of course, that's very simplistic. Normally, I would want to have a record that I actually sent an email and I contacted the customer. So in the JSON other function, we can also add some sort of tick or some sort of customer interaction record that this took place. But as you can see, in a couple of minutes, we actually built a fairly complicated use case, which is very powerful and shows you how easy it is to integrate really powerful machine learning and artificial intelligence backends into the Dashjoin platform. Okay, thank you very much.